Hello and welcome to Occupied Thoughts, a podcast brought to you by the Foundation for Middle East Peace. I'm Peter Beinart, non-resident fellow at FMEP. I'm happy to be here today with Iyad El-Baghdadi, a Palestinian political analyst who runs the research center at the Kawaakibi Foundation based in Oslo. Iyad, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you, Peter, and apologies for the background noise and the general disheveled look. We're having a heat wave here in Oslo.
You and the rest of the planet.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that I've always very, very much appreciated about your writing is the way in which you connect um, uh, what's happening to Palestinians, Palestinian politics, the destruction of Gaza, to kind of regional and global dynamics. And I often find many other people tend to kind of focus on one or the other. And I think you always have really interesting insights into the kind of intersection of the two. So I think I'll just start with a kind of broad question. Israel has been, shall we say, militarily very busy recently. Again, not only really just continuing to pulverize, starve, and slaughter Gaza, but people in Gaza, but the attacks on Hezbollah and in Syria, and the regime change there, and then of course most recently Iran. So when you step back and you look at this, try to look for a kind of strategy or common thread in Israel's behavior, not just towards Palestinians, but kind of regionally, what strikes you?
What really strikes me is not really the strategy; it's the psyche, it's the psychology. Uh, so, I mean, you're someone who actually wrote about this very eloquently in the past, but this is basically late-stage Zionism.
Mm.
The founding spirit of Zionism, 1948, was a lot more honest about what it takes to establish a Jewish state. It was far more honest that we're going to be here, we're going to destroy these communities, we're going to displace them, and they're always going to hate us, they're always going to fight us. In the 1990s, let's say 1980s, 1990s, after the peace deal with after the Camp David Accords, and the general, the United States winning the Cold War, there was a certain liberal kind of I don't want to say fantasy. It was kind of like its own decades, which kind of carried this energy that maybe this doesn't have to be the world. Maybe there is some kind of accommodation. Unfortunately, after October 7th, there is this thing that got triggered in the Zionist kind of psyche that kind of says that the only way for us to be safe is to dominate. It's basically safety, security through domination. I don't care, and I follow Hebrew. I don't speak Hebrew, but translates very well to English. I follow the internal debates in Israel very diligently. And one thing that is being, I mean, I've heard it over the last couple of years, really, is in capacity and not intent. So the whole point here is that we don't care about your intention. We don't care what you're going to say. We're never going to trust you. All we care about is what are you capable of hurting us. And if you are, we're going to go out and we're going to destroy your capacity. And that's the only way for us to feel safe. Keep in mind, of course, Israel is, really never really had, allies or friends in the region generally, which kind of what happens if you spend 4 generations kind of dropping bombs on everyone around you. But the whole idea is that this has become self-fulfilling because the more people you kill, the more people will hate you, the more people will want to hurt you, and the more you'll have to kill more just in case, just to keep your nose above water. So this is kind of what's happening here. It's a kind of a doctrine that says, I will only trust you. I will only trust what I can dominate. And if I cannot dominate you, I'm going to keep trying until you are dominated. And if you are a big country like Iran or Syria, etc., then I have to make sure that you're broken up, partitioned, etc., so that you cannot. So the idea here is that it's a version of security that says security is not something that you build with the other. It's not something which is negotiated, and it's something like it's not about accommodating someone else into a vision of security, but rather it's about domination. So this is really the one thing to keep in mind that kind of sits at a more fundamental level than any of the strategy. That said, a lot of, once you have that in mind, you will see that there is kind of a thick strategic logic to a lot of what Israel is doing, whether it's in Gaza or in Syria or in Iran, etc. Netanyahu is often blamed a lot for, it's absolutely true that he prolonged the war because of his own political calculus. It's absolutely true also that he doesn't really do anything except if it actually benefits him politically. He is a political survivalist. And a lot of the time he does things that are bad for Israel on a purely geopolitical level, just really bad for Israel, and really, of course, bad for the cause of Zionism in the world. But he does it because he wants to survive the week or the month, etc., which is kind of actually, ironically enough, this is how dictators basically they go from one crisis to the other, but somehow they survive. That said, a lot of what's happening right now, a lot of it gets blamed on Netanyahu. But the thing is, Netanyahu, when it comes to operating in the foreign policy realm, he doesn't do things which are not within the window in Israel. So it's not like he's actually doing something that is insane in the language or in the logic of the Israeli security establishment. It might be insane to the world, but within Israel, a lot of the stuff, for example, like the only way for us to be in Gaza is to ethnically cleanse Gaza. That's actually kind of
widely supported.
Yeah, widely supported. The war in Iran is widely supported. The invasion of southern Syria, widely supported. So it's not just widely supported. It actually does, once you actually internalize the geopolitics of the state of Israel, and it's a very unique situation where it's hegemonic in its region, but it's also very dependent upon foreign support. Once you internalize all of that, internalize really the political calculus of Netanyahu and the kind of psyche of late-stage Zionism, a lot of this actually makes some kind of thick sense. It actually does make sense, and that's what allows us to both analyze it and predict what they're going to do next.
Mm-hmm. So let me pick up where you just ended. What do you think? What do you think is going to happen now? There's talk that maybe Netanyahu would go for some kind of ceasefire because perhaps he's politically stronger as a result of these attacks in Iran, and Israeli Jews are kind of exhausted by what's happened in Gaza, and want the hostages back. What do you think will happen next?
So I wrote a thread about this like a week ago, was it? Where I was kind of like, so we were waiting to see what's going to happen in the meeting between Trump and Netanyahu, but there are certain fundamentals that we kind of knew that they're not going to change. So I mean, just to give a framework to the audience, when you're looking at the behavior or decisions of a certain political actor, there's the kind of like three levels here. Just like us as human beings, we have the physiological level, like, are you hungry? Are you thirsty, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have the psychological level, you have an emotional level, et cetera. The logic of a state or a state actor or a political actor also is the same. There is the geopolitical logic, which anybody in that position would do. Like, for example, Iran will always try to centralize power and have allies in the region because that's what states do. Whether it is the Iranian regime, whether it's a future, hopefully democratic Iran, whether it's the Shah, etc. That's the logic, geopolitical logic. So number one, geopolitical. Number two is the ideological level, the ideological or identity level. That's where we come to the psyche, etc. And then there is the political level. Basically, just like I said, Netanyahu surviving the week. So over here, I'm looking at Netanyahu himself. And like I said, Netanyahu normally does things in kind of some kind of alignment with what's in his own internal. He's a very shrewd and very skilled politician. So there's four things I said in that thread that he needs to do in order to survive. You keep in mind that October 7th is still his failure. It's still basically his strategy to prop up Hamas. Haaretz, for example, in the aftermath of October 7th, actually ran several features in which, like, it's a series which they actually titled it the Hamas Netanyahu Alliance. And you can actually go to the website and read that. So absolutely, it's basically his strategy. He actually, he owns it. And the security lapses that led to October 7th, of course, we can talk a bit about whether they're inevitable or not. I believe that when you rely upon hard power alone, it's basically just hard power. Then, if you have to scream all the time, your voice is going to crack at some point. So at some, in some way, I feel like October 7th would have happened. Maybe not this devastatingly, but if this is the way that you're going to manage another population, there's going to be something that's happening. That said, the security lapse was enormously traumatic for the Israeli state and for the Israeli army. And for that reason, it's still on his it's the Israeli public still see that this is Netanyahu's failure. So he needs to, in order for him to win another mandate, and keep in mind, of course, he has the same problem that Trump once had, and many dictators have, which is that they can't be out of power. If they're out of power, they're gonna end up in prison or in exile, etc. He has a lot of legal problems, and the only thing that keeps him out of the courts is actually he still has to go to courts once in a while to extend his the reckoning, but he needs to be in power all the time. Like this is the thing. So that said, he's sorry, I lost my thread there for a second, just thinking about Netanyahu compared to Trump, because Trump kind of
Yes.
he got out of a lot of this because there was no accountability in the first place.
Yeah.
But coming back to this, there's four things that I assess that Netanyahu needs to do in order to win a new mandate, and to be able to be politically safe. Keep in mind, his coalition is mostly to the right. This is actually the funny thing about Netanyahu, because he's associated with the right, but he's normally the most.
He's more in the center of his coalition. Yeah.
No, he's always the most secular liberal. I know liberal here is kind of a loaded word, but within the Israeli body politic, he's the most secular member of his coalition. Like what I mean to say is that normally his coalition is to the right of him.
Yes.
He really knows how to make these kind of coalitions. So there's four things he needed to do. Number one, he wanted to use the attack on Iran to win. Like if the attack on Iran was more successful, he would have immediately called for snap elections and said, I'm going to win a new mandate. Unfortunately, the attack on Iran was not conclusive. Like, he did get a bump in Israeli politics, but not nearly enough for him to win another mandate. And then there are, of course, the leaks about, did we really destroy it? Was it really fully destroyed? And, like the whole thing about, Trump saying it was obliterated, and then, is it really obliterated or not? So all of that is not like the Israeli public are used to this kind of language, that it's a tactical victory, but not a strategic victory. So I think they accept that. And largely, the Israeli public believe that it was, first of all, they supported the war in Iran, and they thought that it's successful. On this, there's no debate within Israeli society, or at least, of course, there is a debate in any society. But I mean is that the majority opinion is to this point. That said, it wasn't enough to win him a mandate. So he needed to win. That's why we started to hear about peace right after that. We started hearing about the Abrahamic Accord came back from the dead, for a week or so. We started talking about normalization with Syria, which would coming to that will never happen. We started talking, of course, about the ceasefire in Gaza and ending the war. And there was this complicated, and of course, we also started hearing about what's going to happen next with Iran, because it was very clear that this is one round and there might be other rounds. So I identified these four things that he needs to do, or these four files that he has to tackle. You have the ceasefire in Gaza, you have Syria, you have normalization with Saudi Arabia, like kind of Abrahamic Accords 2.0, etc., or extension of the Abrahamic Accords, and you have Iran. My assessment at the time is that each of these four things comes with a major problem. Like, he needs to get something done, but if he does it, something else breaks, and he can't afford that to break. So, for example, with the ceasefire, he needed to, because the war is the Israeli public want the war to end.
Right.
The IDF is exhausted. The reservists, basically, less and less reservists are coming back. There are re-enlisting, or answering immediately. You have the major problem, internally, like we don't really hear about this, but it's majorly disruptive within Israel, which is the Haredi ultra-Orthodox issue, which again, they just left the government right now over this issue, which is that, ultra-Orthodox Jews are, which are kind of, I think they're 1/8 of the population right now, and their numbers are increasing. I think they're 1/3 of all children, or 1/2 of all children in Israel. I can't remember basically, they're a growing demographic. And of course, they get to vote. And so a lot of them, the majority of them actually do not serve in the army. And so, and they also don't pay taxes. They're basically subsidized by the state. So there's a shrinking proportion of the population which was non-ultra-Orthodox, who have to carry the weight, both economically and now in terms of fighting, of this growing population. So there's that. There's also the fact that the hostage families are getting more and more and more upset, and they want a resolution. There's also that the certain things that he needs to get done. For example, if he wants to get Saudi normalization, Saudi Arabia has already said the war has to end and there has to be a Palestinian state. When it comes even to discussing what happens in Gaza the day after, like, kind of a transition, again, everybody said the war has to end first. So like I felt, and Trump also, I felt for a while, wanted the war to end. He wanted like a diplomatic win. So for this reason, I felt like there's going to be enough pressure that they will sign some kind of agreement. The problem, of course, is how do we end the war while still upholding the narrative that we won? Because Hamas was not destroyed. And keep in mind that Netanyahu from the start repeatedly and every occasion said that the point of this war is to end Hamas. Hamas has to end. Hamas cannot exist after this.
Right.
So the problem here is that Hamas still exists. Hamas, in fact, has escalated its guerrilla kind of attritional warfare in the Gaza Strip during this time. Keep in mind, if you remember the March. So there was a ceasefire in March that basically fell apart after the 60 days, and then the war was restarted. Before that, we didn't see any Hamas, and suddenly, once the ceasefire is there, Hamas kind of like emerged almost from the ground with their uniforms, and they have these ceremonies, hostage exchange ceremonies, which was extremely humiliating for Netanyahu at the time, because Netanyahu this is basically like in your face that you did not defeat us, we're still here, right?
Right.
So it was interesting that during these negotiations, the ceasefire negotiations, Hamas actually agreed to hold no celebrations, to basically not do anything that outwardly looks like a victory, right? They even agreed that we're not going to have any governance, we're not going to have any part in the governance of Gaza after this. So like they actually said, we're not interested. However, they're still stuck to their red lines, which is we're not going to leave Gaza. We're not going to give up our weapons. And we're not going to allow any Israel cannot stay in Gaza, right? So we saw this kind of double kind of. So on one hand, they're talking about a ceasefire, a 60-day ceasefire, but at the same time, they're manipulating the aid system towards what happens after the 60 days, which is the concentration camp plans for Rafah. One of the sticking points, for example, is that Israel in these negotiations did not want. So Hamas wanted the UN and other mechanisms to take control of distribution of aid, and Israel said no. They want GHF, Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, to their own kind of outfit to be the one in charge of this. And you can see that the strategy with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is really to control the movement of people within Gaza by controlling where aid is located. So basically, the idea is that if we only distribute aid in these areas, that means people are going to move where the food is, right? So this is their kind of their logic. I'll take a break because I think I've been talking for a lot.
Yeah. So it seems like on the one hand, you have this Israeli goal to concentrate Palestinians in a small area of Gaza, right? With the hopes that many of them will leave somehow, that the U.S. maybe will get countries to take them, blah blah. And on the other hand, you have this situation that Hamas may not be in power. I mean, or it may not be the official government, but it seems like it would still be probably the power on the ground, right? I mean, so how do you think and I don't understand if Israel's not on the ground in Gaza, how would it enforce the control of Palestinians in these small areas anyway? Presumably Palestinians would move back to the other parts of the Gaza Strip. So to what degree do you think Israel's plan for concentrating Palestinians in this smaller area of Gaza with the ultimate goal of expelling as many as possible, and obviously many others will die, do you think that actually Israel is going to be able to achieve that, or is that ultimately going to be a failure?
I mean, the jury is out. They might be able to achieve this to a small degree because they've already achieved that kind of with the GHF system, because they, again, if you have a family, you have kids, and you need baby formula, for example, the only place for you to keep your children alive is to be where the aid is. Of course, you're going to be there, right? And the reason why these people, a lot of Palestinians risk their lives for aid. A lot of the time, they're actually walking there for hours to get there. That said, I mean, it's interesting to see what internal communications within, internal debates within Israel say, because there's a big dispute between the prime minister Netanyahu and the army, the IDF, because the IDF is kind of saying, attrition attacks by Hamas are increasing, and the attrition attacks are carrying a certain logic, a certain pattern. There's a certain pattern. It's obviously well organized, and it's always put on video, and then they post the video within 24 hours to say we're here. So there's also the logic, like there's a strategy here with Hamas, right? So they're actually doing this in order to pressure Netanyahu to say that the longer you wait, the more there's going to be some bad news. So the army is also saying that the reason why these attacks Hamas attacks are becoming successful is because a lot of the army personnel are exhausted. They're exhausted. They can't control. They can't focus. And now you're asking us to clear out an entire area in Rafah, and then build infrastructure over there. And the infrastructure, nobody's going to pay for it. Israel has to pay for it. And I think that the figures that I've seen is like $3 to $4 billion. Who's going to pay for it? So
they're vulnerable to it. Yeah, they're vulnerable to attack. I mean, it's one thing if they go in and then they out, but when they're sitting there building this, then they're vulnerable to a Hamas attack.
Yep. And there's also the fact that while you're doing this, you also need to be fighting within Gaza. So how are you going to So the army basically openly the IDF has already told Netanyahu two things. It said we cannot the goal of dismantling Hamas in the way that you put it, we cannot do this. They've already said this. Been seeing it for months, if not years. We're almost coming to 2 years now of after October 7th, and they've said this repeatedly that this. If you want to dismantle Hamas, it has to be a political thing. It cannot be militarily. We can't. They keep going in, taking over a neighborhood, blowing it up, and then leaving. And then what do you know? What Hamas pops up again.
Right.
The second thing that they're saying now is that we can't do this. We can't. Number one, we can't do it budget-wise. How are we going to build this? But the thing is, knowing, as a Palestinian, we've seen Israel do this for a very, very long time. A lot of the time, they would have a plan, and the plan would be stuck for years, sometimes decades. And then when they have the opportunity, it will advance a little bit. I'll give you an example. So there's since 2005, 2006, there's been an area. I forgot the code for. I think Area E or something in the West Bank, which Israel wants to annex. And if Israel annexes that area, it essentially achieves two things. Number one, it will create a contiguous area with all of its settlements in the West Bank, but also it would split the West Bank in two.
Yes.
What do you know? It was stuck in 2005. 2 days ago, it advanced. 2 days ago, when Netanyahu actually needs this, he needs kind of to keep his,
I think it's called E1, if I remember correctly. I think it's E1.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. So 2 days ago, suddenly it's advanced, and when does it happen? It happens after Netanyahu comes back from DC, and he needs to keep his right-wing, coalition partners on his side. So you see this kind of. So when you see this kind of pattern where something can be planned, and they can say this is our plan, and they're very open about it. They say this is the logic. This is why we want to do it. We don't have the opportunity to do it now, but at some point in the future, if they do, they will start pushing towards it. So they've already said in the aftermath, I think weeks, I can't remember the exact timeline, but it was shortly after October 7th that, yes, it seems that the only way for us to win is we need to drive everyone out of Gaza. That's the only way for us to actually feel secure. We can never allow Hamas to be in Gaza, but then we can't really, so long there are Palestinians in Gaza, there's going to be some Hamas in Gaza. So what's the solution? Let's just drive them out. Of course, this created a huge problem with Egypt and Jordan, and then but they haven't dropped that logic. That still is the logic. Yes, at the moment it seems that they're unable to do it, but then they will still be looking for opportunities. Whenever the opportunity arises, they will advance it a little bit.
Yes. So one of the things when I listen to Israeli and pro-Israeli discourse, there's a lot of talk about extending the Abraham Accords, and a belief that this attack on Iran makes it more likely that they can have a deal with the Saudis, with Syria, with Lebanon, and then also a great reliance on the idea that some constellation of Arab countries, the Emirates is always their favorite, but maybe Egypt, others will also play a very important role in Gaza, maybe pay for the things that they don't want to pay, somehow help to run things. The Gulf well, you know the Arab world in general very well in the politics. What do you think that's the possible? What do you think of those two ideas? First of all, the extension of the Abraham Accords now, and also the role of Gulf and other Arab countries in Gaza.
So it's fantasy, and I was expecting to see it after the war with Iran because I understood that Netanyahu needs that. So when I saw the narratives come up, like, yeah, of course, this is exactly what he's going to do. But it's pure fantasy. Let's start with the second part, which is like administration of Gaza post Hamas or post war. Yes, there's been some ideas exchanged that and it's always a different bunch of countries. Sometimes the UAE, Qatar, and Egypt. Sometimes the Morocco is in the mix. Because Israel has relations with Morocco. Sometimes it's Jordan is included. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's the Americans. Sometimes it's so. Anyway, it's a different mix. But the idea here is, yes, Hamas said that we're not going to be the governance authority, but then they're like, as you said, we're staying and we're keeping our guns. Basically, it means that you can decide who wants to govern Gaza, but we're going to be the power on the ground, right? That said, each of these Arab countries has very clearly said, we're open to the idea if, number one, the war ends permanently, and number two, there's a path. So the Saudis, the way the Saudis worded it's very interesting. They said an irreversible path towards a Palestinian state, irreversible. So there's no reason why these countries would foot the bill, whether it's the reconstruction or whether the manpower, for something. They're not willing to become kind of security subcontractors on Israel's behalf. You broke this. You don't bring us in right now. Like, why should we do it? Like, why should we do it? What's in it for us, in other words? Which brings me to the other side, which is the attack on Iran being kind of good for for regional peace, etc. This is like several years old. So like, it's kind of like you're taking something from now and taking a headline from 7 years ago and matching, like, hey, it makes sense. It doesn't make sense because in 2017, 2018, the first, when the first Abrahamic Accords were being kind of negotiated, and when Trump was he's in his first stint in office, his first term in office, there was a lot of outreach between Israel and Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, but also the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, etc. And it was premised upon this idea that Iran is the main arsonist in the region. It's the most destabilizing force in the region, and we need a hedge against Iran. But also there was like internal calculus, because MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the current crown prince and de facto leader of Saudi Arabia, at that time he was still weak. He's still consolidating power. He had internal enemies. He needed anyone to be on his side. He blew up the whole, he blew up his whole reputation with the Jamal Khashoggi affair. So he needed allies, right? So it made a lot of strategic sense for the Gulf states. I mean, of course, it's completely immoral. I completely disagree with it. But for them, at least in their logic, it made some sense. And it made sense for Mohammed bin Salman, for MBS Saudi Arabia as well, to say that I'm going to be open to a relationship with Israel, because right now, number one, I want to consolidate power in the kingdom, and number two, I need a counter to Iran. Keep in mind, this was the Houthis. The Yemen war is still hot, and once in a while, Houthi missiles, Yemeni missiles would be targeting Saudi Arabia. So all of that put together, you take it to now. And now it's not Iran that is seen as the regional arsonist, especially after the fall of Assad, and also after the very severe degradation when it comes to Hezbollah. The kind of ironically, it's basically Israel's own success against Hezbollah. So what happens there is that Iran now looks like a far smaller security threat to the security of the region. It looks now that Israel is the arsonist. So everybody right now is like, it's not really that we need to ally with Israel against Iran. That doesn't make sense. It's not Iran right now that's the main threat to our security, to regional security. It's actually Israel. And so it doesn't really make sense to them to extend. And again, this is also kind of the logic of why should MBS normalize with Israel now? Well, yeah, he wanted to do it in 2020, but he was weak and he had allies. Now it's a destabilizing move. Like it's a move that actually increases political risk for him. Why should he do it now when, again, there's nothing in it for him? Like there's nothing more that you can give him that would make it worth it, in other words.
Yeah, yeah. Very interesting. Iyad, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much, Peter.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning into this episode of Occupied Thoughts. Please make sure to check out the FMEP website, fmep.org, for resources related to this podcast and lots of other rich content related to Palestine and Israel. And please make sure you are subscribed to this podcast to stay up to date. You can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Spotify, and you can also watch video versions of our podcast, including this one, on YouTube. With that, I'm Peter Beinart signing off until the next episode of FMEP's Occupied Thoughts.